Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. This is great. It's a diagram. You did this the last time. So it's a diagram. On the left, it says the carbon footprint of food. Oh, fuck, I love this. And on the right, it says global greenhouse gas emissions. And it's like a pencil drawing, like a kind of like a pie chart-ish kind of thing. Well, a donut chart, an exploded donut. There's a lot to describe because the carbon footprint of food has 1, 2, 3, 7 or so sections. Buying choices, which is about 10%. Cooking choices, which is about 20%. And then food processing and agriculture and land use is another, or food choices is 70%. So that's about your carbon footprint.
Yep.
And then on the right, global greenhouse gas emissions. There's like a gray section, which is transport, industry, amenities. And then you've got the other exploded sections, which are like deforestation. Let's see, ruminant burps, yep. Of course.
Yeah.
And farts, I imagine, and energy use, global greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, Matthew, what have you done? What is this?
There's a lot when you can't see it. Right?
I love it. Go for it. What is this?
Okay, so last time I was on, we were talking about my last book, which was Climate Change and the Road to Net Zero, which was a serious old book, and I gave you 4 pictures of some serious pie charts, bar charts, whatever they may have been, and we were talking about the science, technology, economics, and politics of climate change and how we get to a low carbon economy, a low carbon society. And kind of out of that book was born the idea of my recent book, which is a bit more fun, has been a fun project for me, which is actually a cookbook. And it all really comes down to this pie chart that you're looking at.
Yep.
And there's lots going on there, but in very simple terms, writing that first book made me realize agriculture is super important.
Right.
So there are 4 major sectors in the economy which emit greenhouse gases. Agriculture is one of them, and it accounts for about 1/4 of all the emissions that go into the atmosphere and cause climate change.
Wow.
And the problem is that agriculture is a little bit different. So my last book, I was looking at all the options of how we solve climate change, whether it's worth it, should we do it, how much is it going to cost, what can we do, what are our options. And actually in things like you just mentioned, transport, amenities, which is like heating and cooling your house, cooking, and then transport and industry, you've actually got loads of commercially available technology already out there, which can switch away from fossil fuels and get us to net zero. And it can actually do it at a very reasonable price. And I actually think the whole net zero system, you'll not only eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, but it'll end up cheaper for the consumer because this technology is just getting so cheap so quickly.
Yeah.
But agriculture was a little bit different. And I hadn't appreciated this going into that book. But agriculture, the emissions there aren't from burning fossil fuels so much as direct emissions from the other things that you mentioned, deforestation.
Mm-hmm.
So when you cut down a forest, you burn the trees, the trees rot and the CO2 emissions go up in the atmosphere and you're no longer storing them. Things like cow burps, or as you point out, farts. So these are ruminants like cows and sheep. The way they digest food is different and they belch out methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's 30 times worse than CO2. And, I went into writing that book. No, I knew about it, but I thought, cow burps.
Yeah.
That's just a sideline issue that makes a headline because it's funny. It's actually nearly as big as deforestation. It's nearly 5% of all global emissions.
Wow.
This is serious stuff, right?
Yep.
And then there's various other bits like using too much fertilizer and the way rice paddies are dried down and things like that. And what you realize coming away from that is that it's going to have to be a very different way that you get agriculture to net zero. You can't just throw technology at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me on to the other pie chart there, which is showing you where the emissions on a plate of food come from. Mm-hmm. So if I asked you, without looking at that chart, where do you think the carbon footprint of the food that you eat comes from? What are the top one or two items that cause it?
I would think it's things like machinery to harvest, and maybe just because I think a lot of land, because I think a lot of the sort of ways of harvesting or whatever is really, I mean, you're always hearing about land being used and being kept expanding for agricultural use, right? So deforestation, I guess, is just to create more land and then burning and whatever. So that's my quick, like, put me on the spot. That's what I'd say.
No, 100%. And you've nailed it on the head.
Oh.
I didn't want you to nail it on the head because when I had these conversations with most people, they say food miles, like transporting food around the world,
Yeah.
or the way that you cook it. And actually, these are the ones that the stories get written on, the headlines get made on, oh no, we're importing avocados from Mexico and
Right.
shipping them around the world, and this is terrible. And things can always be done better. But if you look at the breakdown, which is in that chart, so buying choices, which is like transport and packaging, so where you're buying it from or where it's come from originally, and packaging of food, that's about 10% of the carbon footprint of food.
Right.
Cooking choices, so how you cook it, electric, gas, barbecue, whatever it may be. And then overeating and waste. So again, these are cooking choices.
Sure.
You choose how much to put it onto your plate and how much you can eat. Combined, they're about 20% of the emissions. The other 70%, as you say, it's all down to the land use, the way it's processed and produced.
Mm-hmm.
And these are what I call food choices, because these are fundamentally dependent on the types of ingredients that you're choosing. And sort of putting these two bits together, so like agriculture is super important. Food choices are the most important lever to reducing agricultural emissions. You realize then that it's not technology that's going to solve this, but it requires cultural change in what we eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so really that was the idea behind me writing a cookbook. I wanted to show that you can still, there are ways of cooking where you can reduce the carbon footprint, not by changing your oven or by buying from different shops or making sure you don't have food miles. But the biggest fundamental driver is in choosing what you eat and what the ingredients are.
So the ingredients, right.
Exactly, ingredient choices.
Yeah, because I mean, I think the just as a person who is a conservationist and who cares and who's kind of a little bit aware of this stuff. I mean, I know that, like, for example, people really love almond milk, and that almond milk has like almonds and the heart, all that. So, I mean, I don't know if that's even picking the right thing. I mean, I don't know if meat is by far the most problematic ingredient, but yeah, like I'm aware of the fact that what you choose as an ingredient is going to have a huge impact.
Absolutely. But I think people are becoming aware of that. As you say, they know meat is kind of bad, but perhaps they don't know how bad and what meats.
Right.
So I actually came out of the last book and I realized actually I'd gone into it thinking, all of these guys who care about climate change and say that veganism or going vegetarian is the biggest change you can make. I'd always sort of scoffed at that. But coming out of actually looking at the numbers and looking at how we get to net zero, absolutely, eating a plant-based diet is the biggest change that you can make.
Right.
In terms of a personal change, a cultural change that you can make. So to give you an idea of that, the average diet for an average human being in the planet requires about 1 football pitch of farmland to grow all the crops, to graze the animals, etc., etc. If you go vegan, you only need a penalty box to grow all the food that you need all year round.
Right.
So it comes back to this land use change. So if everyone on the planet went vegan, suddenly we could reforest. Not only do the emissions go down because you're having to farm less land, so emissions would go down ongoing instantly by like 75%, but also you would have so much freed up land that you no longer need, that you could replant trees on that land, and you could replant enough trees to sequester, to draw down all the CO2 that humans have ever put into the atmosphere, ever.
Right, right.
Completely. That's how powerful it is.
Yeah, very
So
powerful.
I went vegan after
Wow.
writing the book.
Of course.
But so I didn't go fully vegan. I went vegan 4 days a week, which I know is not vegan to all the vegans listening, but
You know, the Buddhist in me would say, just do your best. You know, like life is hard enough. Just do your best.
Yeah.
Even that
so that is enough.
is huge, huge.
Yeah.
And on that very lighthearted note, let's go on to the next image. So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting.